They had been warned their entire lives that Americans were monsters, cruel creatures who tortured prisoners and laughed at suffering. Surrender, they were told, meant disgrace worse than death. So when 247 Japanese women stepped off a transport ship into the fog of San Francisco Bay in September 1945, they expected brutality. What they found instead shattered everything they believed. The fog clung low over the water as the ship crept toward the dock. The women stood in tight clusters, thin from hunger, uniforms torn, faces hollow from months of fear. Many were nurses, clerks, radio operators, women who had served the Imperial Army and now waited for punishment. Some clutched small bags, others nothing at all. Above them, seagulls cried as the red towers of the Golden Gate Bridge emerged like something unreal, untouched by war. "They will kill us when we land," whispered Ko, a young nurse from Osaka. Yuki, beside her, said nothing. She had heard the stories. Americans were said to be animals, men who destroyed honor and laughed while doing it. The ship docked. Soldiers waited below. Not shouting. Not threatening. Some laughed among themselves. One even waved. That was the first crack in everything they believed. A Japanese-American translator spoke calmly. They would be processed, medically examined, and housed. They were prisoners of war, protected under international law. The words sounded unreal. Protected? They descended the gangway expecting cruelty. Instead, they were met with quiet efficiency and something worse, kindness. Inside the processing building, American nurses waited. "Women, come. Professional." They were told to undress for examination. Panic rippled through the group. Shame burned hotter than fear. But the nurses never mocked them, never rushed them. Towels were handed gently. Voices remained soft. Then came the showers. Hot water. Real soap. Steam filling the room. Many of the women began to cry. Some laughed through tears as the water washed months of dirt and fear from their skin. Ko scrubbed until her skin turned pink, overwhelmed by the scent of soap, flowers, spring, a world before bombs. Yuki stood under the water with her eyes closed, trembling as warmth poured over her shoulders. Clean clothes followed. Simple dresses, socks, mirrors. Some barely recognized themselves. "I forgot I could look like this," one woman whispered. Then came the meal. Long tables, white cloths, the smell of roasted meat and bread. The scent alone froze them in place. Plates were set down, chicken, mashed potatoes, vegetables, bread, butter, milk, coffee. No one touched the food. "This must be a trick," someone whispered. But it wasn't. When Yuki finally lifted her fork and tasted the chicken, she broke down. The flavor was real, rich, warm, human. Others followed. Some cried as they ate. Some laughed. Some stared at their plates in disbelief. Ko tasted bread so soft it nearly made her dizzy. For a moment she forgot the ruins of home, the hunger, the dead. Then the guilt hit her like a wave. Her family was starving, and here she was eating better than she had in years. The soldiers watched quietly. One whispered, "They're crying." Another replied, "Let them eat." That night they slept in real beds. Mattresses, blankets, warmth. Outside, trucks hummed, radios played soft American music, and insects chirped in the dark. Ko lay awake, full and clean and confused beyond words. Everything she had been taught was unraveling. Days passed. A routine formed. Breakfasts of eggs and fruit. Work assignments that were light and humane. Some women worked in kitchens, others in laundry or medical wards. Ko assisted nurses who treated her like a colleague, not a captive. They were even paid small amounts of camp currency. Enough to buy chocolate, soap, notebooks. Luxuries. Humanity. On Sundays there was rest. Books. Religious services. A sense of normal life returning where none should exist. And that was the hardest part. Because kindness became its own burden. Each meal reminded them of those starving at home. Each warm blanket felt like betrayal. Each act of care chipped away at the lies they'd been raised on. They had been taught the enemy was evil. Instead, the enemy was human. And that realization was more unsettling than hatred ever could be. Letters from Japan arrived slowly, filled with hunger and loss. The women read them in silence, guilt heavy in their chests. They were no longer prisoners in chains. They were prisoners of understanding. And that, they realized, might be the hardest captivity of all. Ko received her mother's letter in late October. She sat on the edge of her bunk as evening light spilled through the narrow window, turning the paper in her hands almost translucent. The sheet was so thin she could see her fingers through it. Her mother's handwriting, once neat and elegant, now wandered across the page uneven and tired. My dear Co. We heard you are alive, held somewhere in America. This brings relief and sorrow. Tokyo is gone. Our home is rubble. Your father and I sleep beneath metal sheets. We eat once a day if we are lucky, rice water, sometimes cabbage leaves. Your brother grows thinner. He asked for you often. He remembers the sweets you brought him before the war. There are no sweets now. There is almost nothing. But we live, and for that we are grateful. I pray you are treated kindly. I pray you are safe. Ko read the letter 3 times. Her hands shook more with each line. When she finished, she folded it carefully and placed it in her trunk. That evening she could not eat. She stared at her plate, roast beef, carrots, warm bread, and saw only her brother's hollow face. She pushed the food away. She wasn't alone. All across the camp, women were receiving similar letters. Stories of hunger, of burned neighborhoods, of families scattered or dead. One woman learned her husband had starved. Another that her children had been sent to the countryside because there was nothing left in the cities. Outside the wire, life continued. Stores were full. Cars rolled down clean streets. Children played in parks. The women saw it during work details, normalcy untouched by war. It felt obscene. One afternoon, Yuki worked in a field harvesting vegetables. At lunch, an American guard opened his metal tin and began handing out sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. My wife made extra, he said casually through a translator. She said you might be hungry. Ham and cheese. Soft white bread. Yuki accepted it with both hands, bowing so deeply tears fell onto the dirt. That night, she wrote in her journal. His wife does not know me. I am her enemy. And yet she feeds me. How am I supposed to hate someone like that? The women began to change. Their faces filled out. Color returned to their skin. Their hair grew glossy. When they caught their reflections, they barely recognized themselves. Tomoko stood before a mirror one morning, touching her cheek in disbelief. I look healthy, she whispered. Then she remembered her children's hollow eyes in the last photograph she'd received and turned away, ashamed. Guilt followed them everywhere. To be warm while their families froze. To eat while others starved. To sleep in clean beds while cities lay in ashes. This was a suffering no one had prepared them for. One afternoon, Ko stumbled while carrying linens and dropped them across the corridor. Instinctively she froze, bracing for anger. Instead, an American officer knelt beside her, gathering the sheets with a smile. Happens to everyone, he said lightly. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the kindness. He handed the linens back, gave a small salute and walked away whistling. Ko stood there long after he left, stunned. Another evening, Yuki heard music drifting from an open barracks window. Inside, American soldiers were listening to a record. One noticed her watching and waved her over. He handed her the record with a grin. For you. Music. She tried to refuse. He insisted. That night, the women gathered as jazz filled the room, bright, strange, alive. Some turned away. Others closed their eyes and let it wash over them. When winter arrived, frost crept across the windows. The women braced for cold, but instead, the commander announced more coal and new blankets. No ceremony. No expectation of thanks. They noticed we were cold, Tomoko whispered. They noticed. She remembered burning furniture back home to survive winter nights. The contrast was unbearable. The kindness became heavier than cruelty ever was. At night, the women debated in hushed voices. Some clung fiercely to hatred, refusing to accept comfort. Others embraced this new reality, learning English, laughing, adapting. Most hovered somewhere in between, torn, conflicted, exhausted. Ko lay awake many nights, staring at the ceiling. By day she worked in the infirmary, learning English words, helping nurses. One of them told her, "You're good at this. You should be a nurse after the war." After the war. The phrase haunted her. She read her mother's letters again and again. Hunger, cold, loss. And here she was, safe, fed, learning, growing stronger. The guilt was unbearable. Yuki struggled too. She had believed in the empire with her whole heart. Now she watched American soldiers joke, help one another, show kindness without command. It shattered everything she thought she knew. How can they be both kind and capable of such destruction? She asked one night. Because they're human, someone replied. And humans can be both. That answer terrified them all. By December, the women no longer knew who they were supposed to be. Not enemies, not allies, not victims, not free. They were suspended between truths, between what they had believed and what they were now witnessing. And when Christmas came and the Americans decorated a tree and invited them to celebrate, something inside them finally broke open. Because kindness, when offered to those taught only to expect cruelty, can be the most devastating force of all. Then came the gifts. One by one, the women were handed small wrapped packages, bright paper, neat ribbons, the kind of care that felt almost unreal inside a prisoner camp. Co held hers for a moment like it might explode, then opened it with shaking fingers. Inside, a bar of soap, a comb, a small mirror, and a chocolate bar. Nothing extravagant. Nothing meant to impress. And yet the way it was wrapped, like it mattered, hit her harder than any shouted order ever could. Co stared down at those simple items resting in her lap, and something inside her didn't snap in pain. It split open, quietly, like a seed cracking in darkness so a new thing can grow. This wasn't bribery. It wasn't propaganda. It wasn't a calculated move to win loyalty. It was just human. One person giving another person something small and kind because it was Christmas. That was the moment Co finally understood what made this captivity so devastating. The Americans weren't treating them well because they feared punishment from the world. They weren't doing it only because a treaty demanded it. Yes, the Geneva Convention existed. Yes, there were rules. But the rules didn't explain the smiles, the softness, the instinct to notice suffering and respond to it without cruelty. They were behaving this way because this was simply how they believed people should be treated, enemy or not, prisoner or not, Japanese women or not. Weeks earlier these women had belonged to the army America had fought across an ocean. Now they were being handed a ribbon-wrapped mirror. And that truth was dangerous. Because it suggested American power wasn't only bombs and bullets. It was an idea. That each individual had value, even the one on the wrong side of the wire. That victory didn't require humiliation. That control didn't need brutality. That an enemy could be conquered and still treated with dignity. This was the ideology Japan had been raised to reject. The belief that the person mattered, not just the state. That rights weren't a privilege granted by leaders, but something that existed simply because a human being existed. And it was working on them right now. Every hot shower. Every clean sheet. Every blanket delivered without drama. Every meal served without spite. It was a living argument, repeated daily until resistance began to crumble. You can defeat us with your armies, it seemed to say. But we will rebuild something inside you with mercy. We will show you there is another way. Yuki sat beside Ko, clutching her own gifts, tears running freely down her cheeks. It's not even a weapon, she whispered. It's just who they are. Her voice broke. That's what makes it so terrifying. Around them, other women cried too. Not the simple crying of sadness, but something knotted and heavy, release and grief tangled together. Grief for the beliefs they'd carried like armor. For the sacrifices they'd made for those beliefs. For the years lost to a story that now looked like a lie. Then Tomoko stood. She walked to the front of the hall and bowed deeply toward the American commander. The room went still. Through the translator, she spoke in a careful voice that trembled with exhaustion. Thank you for treating us as human beings. We did not expect this. We were taught to expect cruelty. You have shown us something we do not understand yet. But we are grateful. The commander looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight, his face flushing as if he'd been accused of something rather than thanked. We're just following regulations, he said. The Geneva Convention requires proper treatment of prisoners. We're not doing anything special. But they were. They absolutely were. Because rules don't make a man kneel on the floor to help an enemy prisoner pick up fallen linens. Rules don't make a guard's wife pack extra sandwiches for girls she's never met. Rules don't explain music shared, blankets ordered, kindness offered without demand. Choosing dignity when vengeance would be easier, especially when your own people had bled, was not nothing. It was everything. And as the party continued, something shifted among the women like a tide turning. The hardliners grew quieter. The debates lost their sharp edge. Resistance began to feel like a burden they could no longer carry. You can only call someone a demon for so long when that demon hands you a Christmas ribbon and steps back without asking for anything in return. The transformation wasn't complete, far from it. Some women would wrestle with what they'd lived through for years. Others would never fully speak of it. But in that decorated hall, beneath a tree lit like a foreign star, something fundamental changed. They began to see their captors not as monsters but as people. Flawed people, capable of terrible things, yes. The same nation that offered soap and chocolate had also burned cities and dropped bombs. That contradiction didn't disappear. If anything, it became the hardest truth to hold, that mercy and destruction could exist in the same hands. But still, people. And once you see that, propaganda loses its grip. Once you see that, loyalty starts to ask questions. KO's mirror moment came in January 1946, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She was in the hospital supply room, sorting instruments and bandages, when she caught her reflection in the glass of a cabinet door. She froze. For a heartbeat she didn't recognize herself. The woman staring back had round cheeks, clearer skin, bright eyes, hair that shone even in the dim light. The hollow, haunted face of the war years, the face she'd worn like a wound, was gone. She looked young again. No, she looked better than she had before the war. And that realization slammed into her so hard she had to grip the cabinet to steady herself. Because even in peacetime Japan, she had never eaten like this. Never had this kind of medical care. Never had her basic needs met with such consistency. The enemy had restored her to herself. Her hands began to tremble. Her breath came in short, broken pulls. And the betrayal she felt wasn't aimed at America. It was aimed at home. Japan had taken her youth and poured it into a machine. It had fed her slogans instead of food, demanded sacrifice while offering nothing but hollow praise. It had taught her that hunger was noble, that suffering was honor, that dying for the emperor was the purest calling. And now she stood behind barbed wire, alive, fed, healthy, treated with more dignity as a prisoner than she had been as a free citizen. The truth didn't bruise her. It broke her. She slid down to the floor and sobbed deep, wrenching sounds from somewhere primal. She cried for the girl she'd been, for the years she'd given, for the people who died believing the lie meant something. She cried for her family still trapped in ruins, still paying the price for decisions made by men who would never go hungry. 10 minutes later, Nurse Helen found her there. The American woman didn't rush in with orders or questions. She didn't try to fix it. She simply sat down on the floor beside Co, close enough to be present, not so close it felt like pressure. "It's okay," Helen said softly. "It's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel betrayed." Co barely understood the English, but she understood the mercy inside the voice. And that was the final shattering. Because this woman, this enemy who could have hated her, who might have lost someone to Japanese bullets, was offering comfort to a prisoner collapsing under the weight of truth. Co saw it then, plain and brutal. This was what democracy looked like when it wasn't a slogan. This was what it meant to believe a person had worth before they had earned it, before they had proved loyalty, before they had even been forgiven. Japan hadn't just lost a war. Its entire worldview had been exposed as hollow. That evening, Ko stood in the barracks and spoke to the others. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I saw myself in a mirror today," she said. "I looked healthy. And I realized I looked better now as a prisoner than I ever did as a free citizen in Japan." A silence spread through the room. "I'm not saying we should forget who we are," she continued. "I'm not saying we should become American. But we have to admit the truth. We were lied to about the war, about the enemy, about what our sacrifice meant. And until we face that, we cannot move forward." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, one by one, women began to nod. Some cried. Some stared at the floor. A few resisted, stiff with anger. But most understood. Because they had all seen themselves in mirrors. They had all felt the unbearable contradiction of being healthier in captivity than in freedom. And they had all been forced to confront the same reality. The enemy had not broken them with cruelty. The enemy had broken them with the truth, that they were worth feeding, worth protecting, worth treating as human beings. And once that truth entered their bones, nothing they believed could remain untouched. As winter turned towards spring, rumors of repatriation began to spread. Ships were being prepared. Papers signed. Soon they would return to Japan. It should have felt like salvation. Instead it felt like dread. Ko lay awake at night with her stomach twisted tight, imagining what waited. Rubble where neighborhoods used to be, hunger where there used to be markets, disease where there used to be certainty. Her mother's letters weren't memories, they were warnings. And how could she go home looking full, clean, restored? How could she face her brother's hollow eyes and explain roast chicken, blankets, chocolate? I'm afraid, Yuki admitted one night, voice thin. I'm afraid to go back. What does that make us? Tomoko whispered. To fear our own home. Because this prison has been kinder than the empire ever was. Their conversation stayed in whispers because saying it out loud sounded like treason. But the truth didn't care how it sounded. Some women began asking American officers if there was any way to remain. The answer was always the same, no. Repatriation was required. Yet the asking alone revealed how far they had come. They had once been taught death was better than dishonor. Now they were begging not to return, because they had tasted a life where dignity wasn't conditional. The propaganda had promised America would break them. In a way it had been right. Only the breaking didn't come from torture. It came from a simple demonstration, day after day, that there was another way to live.